What is the creepiest glitch in the Matrix you've experienced? 10 years ago I was returning home from a road trip with 2 friends. I received a phone call from my parents asking when we would be arriving, and I explained that we were about 25 minutes away. About a minute later we came around a bend. It was a full moon and we could see the reflection from a lake below us, and other than that the road was completely empty. Suddenly everything went completely dark in the car, no lights from the dash or gauges or headlights on the road. The music also stopped and restarted at the beginning of the CD we were listening to. There was now a vehicle pulled over by the police about 1/4 mile in front of us that hadn't been there a split second before. I assumed I had dozed off for just a second as it was late. I thought it was still quite peculiar, though. After about a minute, the driver of the car tuned the music all the way down and said, "Did that just happen to anyone else?" The other passenger in the back seat sat forward abruptly and exclaimed, "I thought I just fell asleep." We then realized that the clock in the car was reading an hour later than it just had a minute before. To keep ourselves from freaking out, we decided that the car had possibly had a momentary electrical failure and reset the clock to an odd time, turned off the dash lights, headlights, and gauges, and restarted the CD player. But when we arrived home 25 minutes later, we were 1 hour late. I'm missing an hour of my life, and to this day, have no idea how it happened. When I was a teenager I had 2 really intense dreams one night. The first one was about an online friend of mine calling me to say she'd broken up with her boyfriend, and I sang a few lines of Seals Don't Cry to her over the phone. The second dream was finding a real life friend dead body floating in her bathtub. I didn't think anything of it up until I logged online that evening and the online friend came online to tell me her boyfriend broke up with her. I immediately asked if I could call her and she said no. I remember thinking that it meant something, like I could change it. Not long after, my phone rang, and it was real life friend from the dream calling me. I was completely freaked at this point, but talked to her normally. She was just talking about school and shit, up until I realized I heard a splash in the background. I asked her, "Are you in the tub?" And when she said yes I felt like my heart had stopped. I asked her, "What did you do?" She didn't answer me right away, and then after a very long pause she told me she'd taken an entire bottle of pills and chased it with mushrooms and vodka. She'd gotten scared waiting for it to hit her, so she called me so she'd hear someone's voice. I hung up and called 911. By the time they got there she was unconscious, but alive. Today she's a mom to a beautiful little girl, and she's okay at it. Whoa. Thank you for the gold. It seems like one of many who've had an experience like that before. Suicide is a horrific thing, and my deepest sympathies for anyone who has been touched by it. Not creepy, but so vivid and distinct that I still think about it years later. I had a subjectively long, involved dream where I was a vendor in a fish market. I remember getting up early, dressing, doing a whole morning routine, going to get tea, heading out to the docks, buying fish, loading them in a cart, and going to get ice, then haggling for ice, buying some less fresh fish while I was at it, then going to a market to my stall, setting up and selling fish all day. It was so real. I talked to friends, smoked nasty cigarettes, haggled customers, ate lunch, had tea and just lived through the day. At the end of the day, I cleaned up, counted my cash, paid the stall rent, went home, cooked some of the fish I hadn't sold, sling with some veggies and rice that I'd traded for. I drank more tea, relaxed for a while, then drew a hot bath, soaked and smoked some more cigs, then went to bed. The next morning, I woke up refreshed, ready to go down to the docks to buy fresh catch. Except I was in my house, next to my wife, truck parked outside, and it was Saturday, no work. My wife and I were getting geared up to go skiing in Oregon and the car was already packed. Weird thing was, in the dream, I was single and a smoker. I'm not. And the whole long dream had been in fluent Chinese. The effortless kind of fluency that only comes from a lifetime of speaking it. Oh, and I had been Chinese. I'm a big hairy white dude, somewhat fluent in Spanish, and I know a little bit of Russian, but I've never. It was just weird. I've never worked in a fish market. I wonder who I was. I wonder what that was. This happened back in college. I was driving home from my cabin in northern Wisconsin through the Indian reservation. There was a man on the side of the road sort of limping along, and I pulled over and asked if he was okay. He said yes, he was fine. He just needed to get home because his wife decided she still loved him. They'd had a fight. I asked the man where home was, and surprisingly it was the same city where I went to college, about 2 hours away. I offered him a ride. He didn't talk much. He was tired. When we got into town he started giving me directions. Just down here. It's close, he said. Take a left at the lights. Okay. I said, right. Here, he said, pointing. After the white truck. Here. I pulled into the driveway. Yes. Shut up, I said. What? He asked. He was grinning, like he knew what I was going to say next. I used to live here, I told him. You don't say. Yes. Upstairs. Apartment number 3. Yeah. That's ours. Now he was smiling ear to ear. Small world, he said. He thanked me for the ride and got out of my car and walked through the front door of my old apartment building. I know it was just a coincidence, but it was one of the strangest moments of my life. I was heading home with my dad. We stopped at a drive-thru. I start feeling more and more anxious for no reason, to the point where it makes lightheaded and sick to my stomach. We have to wait a little bit ahead because they gave us the order wrong. So I sit there, feeling like shit, and it suddenly comes to me an urge to call my brother. He was trying to call us. He was in a car accident. No one died. Some got seriously bruised. He was only shaken. I told him to shut up and get as far away from the car as possible. He didn't understand but followed through, trying to call some of his buddies, and I could hear them calling him a wuss, him giving up and getting far, and then a loud noise. People shouting. After the whole shit was over he told me what happened. His drunk friend tried to impress some girls in the car, hit the gas, drifted and hit the bottom of the car on some rocks, completely faking with the engine. They stood near the car, the driver still inside trying to turn the engine back on. The hood burst in flames and the car started to burn fast. The driver managed to get away, but got severely hurt. Some of the guys and girls who stood around were hurt and burned too, but not as bad as the driver. My brother was the only one with light bruises from the whole thing. He told me that when I ordered him to get away from the car he was in front of it, inches from the hood. I never experienced anything like this before and after, just this once. It's just a faking weird memory. I don't remember what I was thinking. I remember it like watching a movie and seeing myself and everything from an outside angle. Have a few, but this one stands out. I was catching a SkyTrain in one particular city about 15 minutes from where I get off. While I wait there is a woman with glazed eyes asking people for money. She came up to me, stopped briefly, and asked, "Excuse me, could you spare some money? My brother is in the hospital and I'd like some money to buy him some flowers." That's rich, I thought. Drug addicts are getting more and more obvious with their lines. "Here's $5. Gave it to her without even looking her in the face, convinced of her intentions anyways. My train pulls up, and I get on. I look through the glass at her walking around asking others for money as the train pulls away. The train arrives at the station 15 minutes later, and I walk down and out to the bus stop. There is only one bus the direction I'm going, and just my luck, it is there waiting when I get off the train. So on the bus I hop and wait for the bus driver to finish reading his paper before the doors close and we embark down the highway. About 5 to 10 minutes traveling, the driver pulls over for a routine stop. The doors open, and to my complete astonishment the woman from the SkyTrain walks into the bus, a dozen roses in hand. She looks me right in the eyes as she walks past to take her seat. How in the blue hell did she get there? I took the train before her. I watched her at the train stop from inside as we pulled away. I went over a river. I caught the first and only bus going this particular direction. And not only did she beat me there, she had time to go to a store and buy a dozen roses. To this day I have no idea how this happened. It happened in early 2000 when I was working at a juvenile detention center in a small town in Oklahoma as a corrections officer. I was working nights at the time and went to work at 9 p.m. this one night. When I arrived for work my supervisor looked confused and asked me what I was doing there. I said I work tonight. And he said, but they said you called in a few hours ago saying that you were sick. I was a bit confused and said it must have been someone else and they got the message wrong. After everyone else showed up for work that night it was a bit more weird, but we carried on as usual and assigned everyone their places for the night. I went to work in the control room where I usually work. The control room is the center of the prison that has direct control over the cameras, doors, phones and everything. After I relieved the guard on duty and settled in for the night, I looked at the message that said I called in. It said that I had called at 6:50 and said that I had gotten sick while out cleaning up after the storm. There had been a storm the night before and it was a bit bad, but not anything that I had to go out to clean up. It was truly weird. The supervisor came into the control about that time. He was also a friend of mine outside work and we started talking about it and how odd it was. I decided to call my wife at home and tell her about it while he was still sitting there. I picked up the phone and dialed. After 2 rings a man picked up the phone and with a raspy voice said hello. I did not know what to say for a few seconds. I looked at the phone to make sure I dialed the right number and I had. After a few seconds the person said hello, again in the same raspy voice. I said hello, who is this? This is Taylor, who is this? The person said. My head started spinning because my name is Taylor also. I said in almost a scream, where is Anne? He said Anne's in bed. Who is this? I dropped the phone and told my supervisor to ring me out. I had to get home and I took off towards the door. I could hear Dave pick up the phone behind me and say hello, followed soon after by what the fuck, rather loudly. I ran to my car and drove home faster than what was legal, my mind racing the entire time. I busted through the door and my wife was sitting watching TV and was shocked at me being home. I asked her who was there and she said no one has been here. After a rather long talk with my wife, I went to call the prison to tell them what was going on, but the phone was dead. I went back to work and when I came in Dave was acting weird and asked me, how the hell are you doing this? He told me that when I left, he picked up the phone and the person on the other end sounded like me. He kinda freaked out and hung up the phone. A minute later, as he could see my car leaving the parking lot, I had called back from home and asked what the fuck was going on. He said that I was a bit irate and said I was sick and did not feel like playing these games and was telling him to stop prank calling me and hung up. After convincing him I had no idea what was going on, we went back to work. Later, I find out that the phone line for my area had been knocked down the night before by the storm. This is absolutely the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. Edit. Yes, I posted this on r/glitch_and_the_matrix and r/novelep 7 months ago. This happened when I was 11. I still remember it like it was yesterday. My grandfather was getting old and had been in and out of the hospital a few times that year. At that moment he had been in the hospital for probably 2 days. We had gone into the hospital to visit him, where I gave him a big hug and told him I loved him and would see him tomorrow. That night, I went to bed and had the most beautiful dream. My grandpa came into my room and sat in the rocking chair in the corner. He invited me into his lap and told me he was going away for a while and that someday he would see me again. I shouldn't worry because everything was okay and he wasn't in any pain. I smiled at him and gave him a big hug and told him I understood. I then looked over at my brother sleeping in the bunk below me and asked my grandpa if we should wake him up and tell him. When I turned back around to get a response from my grandpa, he was gone. I ran to the window to look out onto the front yard. There he was waving at me. He whispered, "Go tell your mom and dad exactly what I told you." I looked back at the door to my room and then back at the front yard and he was gone. I immediately woke up, ran to my parents' room and turned on the light. I told them exactly what grandpa had told me. They told me it was just a dream and to go back to bed. I told them again exactly what grandpa told me. Again, frustrated, it was 2 AM, told me to go to bed and we would talk about it in the morning. Just then the phone rang. It was a hospital. My mother started sobbing. Grandpa had passed. At that moment she just sat there with my father staring at me. I still remember their faces. They both looked at each other, then me, then each other, and finally smiled and stopped crying. They gave me a big hug and told me they loved and to go back to bed. They ended up going to the hospital that night and my aunt came over to watch us. But we have never talked about that night since. In fact, I don't think I have ever written about it, which explains the tears rolling down my cheeks right now. Wow, that was liberating. And I'm glad other people have had these types of things happen. When I was like 10 or 11 I was going to the beach with my aunt and her friends. There were 2 cars of us. To get there we had to go through a very large industrial area. We didn't know the direction, so our car was following the other. Suddenly, they did an unexpected turn, and so our driver had to take a sharp bend point. In that moment we heard a very clear, loud voice inside the car saying laughing sharp bend, HM. The driver immediately hit the brakes. We looked at each other, puzzled. We all recognized it as a voice not belonging to any of us. In the very same time, we noticed that the other car has stopped as well. The other driver got out of the car with a scared face and shouted to us, Did you hear that as well? Point. They heard the very same thing inside their car. The area around was full deserted. Point. Edit. Wow, thanks for the interest. A little bit of background. This happened in central Italy in the early 90s. My aunt used to act at the time and most of the other guys were theater actors. The voice scared the shit out of us because it was very clear, near, but not coming from a direction within the car you could distinguish, nor front, nor rear, inside the car, but from no distinct place. It was like mocking us. We were scared, but soon someone started to say, hey, who of you did? Remember, those were comedy actors used to do any sort of strange voice. This, till we noticed the other car stopping and saw the look of the guy driving that car. They all were as scared as us and told us we heard this scary voice inside our car and told the very same words we just heard. Point. We were there in a hot day under the sun in an area with large streets and absolutely nothing and no one around us. No cars, no people, no buildings. We never figured out what happened. As I type this I'm already feeling deja vu. I've always wanted to share this part of my life with someone, but have never been able to, so I'll just tell a bunch of people on the internet. Point. One day I was walking to work and all of a sudden had an urge to walk a different path than usual. I work downtown in a big city. It was a strange spur of the moment urge to walk a different way that changed my life forever. I turned into an alley I had never seen before. As I remember it, I made it about 15 feet or so when an actual glitch happened. Everything in my mind scrambled. I felt like I didn't have a body anymore, just that I was a semi-conscious entity floating through some weird dimension. All of a sudden in the array of different colors and shapes a vision came to me. It was a bunch of strange looking people that in my mind resembled businessmen in suits. They looked startled and panicked that I could see them. One of the people made a quick movement and everything turned to black. Point. When I regained normality, I was on a completely different street. It was the same street that I always used to walk to work. I felt sick and severely disturbed/depressed. Point. I've never done any hard drugs, never experienced any hallucinations, never have had anything like this happen to me. The weird thing is, when the glitch was correcting itself, and I could see those people watching me like a caged animal, I had the feeling that I knew I was being controlled. It still bothers me very much to this day. Point. TLD I had a moment of spontaneity, caused a real life glitch. Life has seemed different ever since. I don't know if this is a source of consolation or not, but a long time ago I had a conversation with an old workmate who described much the same thing. Point. The detail is hazy, but he said one day he in his house, when he felt a sudden need to go outside and stand on his lawn, he claimed it was the strongest, clearest feeling ever, and on doing so he experienced a sort of wobble. He just said everything was screwed up for a moment. And he experienced a feeling of detachment/outsideness. When it passed he tuned to go back inside. Point. Now, while talking to me, he got quite upset at this point and asked me not to think him crazy, but he said the next thing he saw was his car parked in the street and it was the same model/registration, but a different color. He was so thrown at this, and then more so, because then his wife came out to ask what he was doing, and he said he realized she was in all appearance his wife, but somehow not his wife. He said from that point on she liked foods she had claimed to hate before, and sometimes brought up memories he said had zero relation to things they had done in the past. He said things like his route to work was still the same but somehow different. He said there were buildings on the way that either he had missed in the 6 years he'd driven past them 5 days a week or had just appeared overnight. He even said some people he remembered from other departments in work had just vanished, and asking about them brought total incomprehension from other people. He was a totally regular healthy guy, but he said he measured his life in relation to that afternoon. There were things that happened before the change, and everything afterwards. He went to say he was now living his life with a feeling that about 15% of it had spontaneously changed that afternoon. We moved on and drifted apart since then, different jobs, but I've never really felt so sure about the permanence of reality ever since. Back when I was in 5th grade, I remember sitting in class about to take an exam. It was one of those where the teacher would write down the question and we would all write the answer on our sheet. After about the 3rd question, I started to realize that I had already seen these questions in the same order and knew the answers. I honestly remember it being like Groundhog's Day, where I had this déjà vu moment, like I had already sat through the test the previous day. I raised my hand and said we had already done these questions, and I got this dumbfounded look from the teacher and classmates. I looked around like seriously I'm the only one realizing this? Oh really? Our teacher says, what's the next answer? I went up and wrote the next several answers that just came to my head. He looked down at his test, verified the board, then cancelled the test. Spent the rest of the afternoon with the teacher and principal being accused of compromising the test. The principal had him go through all his notes and lesson plans to see if he had briefed the test by accident in the past. They asked the other kids. Nobody else remembered. They all scored shitty on the test. TLDR, I somehow got a glimpse of the future, or my classmates faked me by pretending they never saw the test being briefed. About a year ago I had a terrible nightmare. It started off me waking up in bed during a thunderstorm. As the room illuminated again and again from the flashes of lightning outside, I realized that the bed I was laying in wasn't mine. The head of the bed was against the wall that the door was located on, and from my perspective I couldn't tell if it was open or closed, that is, until I saw the face. At first, just the nose and jaw broke past the door frame, but then an entire face slowly passed through the doorway. I tried to yell, "Who the fuck are you? Where the fuck am I?" but it felt like I had lost my voice. No matter how hard I tried to scream, nothing came out, and this person continued to enter the room, looking dead ahead, away from me. Then, just as the person was completely into the room, their head snapped towards me, and it locked eyes with mine. I tried to get out of the bed, but felt completely paralyzed. The person started making their way to me, but with every step their body contorted in ways that would break a normal person's bones. Their neck snapped so the back of their head touched their back, their jaw lay flat on their chest, their arms had broken at the shoulders and migrated to their back like wings. Just terrifying shit. And just before they reached me, I woke up. The next day I told my mom about it and went into great deal about the room. Turns out it was almost an exact copy of my room when I was a baby. We moved out of that house when I was super young. Like, I have no idea what the insides to any room look like. Just kinda weird, I guess. Edit. So I guess I have sleep paralysis. Cool. 2MANYRL list a few. One day, while standing in the living room of a house I'd rented with friends, I heard my roommate bound down the stairs as he usually did and run into the kitchen, slide across the floor and open the fridge. Being young then too, I turned around to face the open kitchen to tell him to quit running like a little kid in the house, and was looking at an empty kitchen. A second later he bounded down the stairs, ran into the kitchen, slid across the floor, and opened the fridge. When he turned around he said, "Whoa, what the fuck's wrong?" Because I must have been pale as a sheet. When I was child I had a record player. Yes, I'm old, and I used to listen to Kiss. Yes, I'm old and I was a lame kid. Anyway, as kids poorly handled records tended to do, my favorite albums developed scratches that caused the needle to skip here or there. One of the songs always had a skip in the same spot, and I got used to it. Fast forward to a year ago, out of nostalgia I bought and downloaded the song from Amazon, wanting to walk down memory lane. I was listening to it with a friend. and then the song skipped in the same spot, and my friend heard it as well. I know she did, because when I heard it I went berserk and demanded she tell me what she heard, if anything at all, to check my own sanity. She heard it. I replayed it. The skip was gone. I have on several occasions dreamt of a person, place, or event that, within a month, plays out in front of me precisely as I had dreamt. I went to college in California at USC, but the summer before my first semester I did an enrichment program in England at Oxford University. However, before I left, USC held an East Coast orientation for freshmen. I was from New York, and I attended. While there, I made a friend who might continue to be friends with once school began. Anyway, after orientation, I attended the program in England. While there I made a lot of awesome friends, and got very close, platonically, to this one great girl. We had a blast. Upon returning to the States, and settling in at USC, I reconnected with the guy I had met at orientation. I couldn't believe my luck as I just stumbled upon him while he blabbed on a payphone. Yes, I told you, I'm old, which was great, because I had no idea if I'd ever find him, and that day campus was just crawling with students. He put whomever he was talking to on hold, and made quick "Hey, how are you" small talk, promising to chat as soon as he was done on his long distance call. I waited as he explained how a friend he'd made at orientation, me, had just found him randomly, and how weird/cool that was. Then he said my name. Then he made a face. Then he asked me my last name, and, once I told him, he repeated it. Then he made another face. Then he asked me if I knew Rose, last name withheld for this story, and I stuttered, yes. He asked, you met in England? I was sort of stunned now. Yes, this was the friend I'd made there, probably my best friend there. He just handed me the phone. She's my girlfriend. Here she wants to say hello. Way too many coincidences there for comfort. I'm one of those people. I'm someone who, for more than 20 years now, see uncomfortably frequent instances of 11/11. Yes, I have since seen that it is a worldwide phenomenon affecting millions of people. Yes, I saw they made some dumb horror movies about it. Yes, most if not all theories about what it could mean are absurd, and I believe none of them. Now, the first logical response, which was also mine, was to assume that for whatever reason I'm subconsciously prompting myself, based on my own inner clock, to look at the clock at 11:11. And that sat well with me for a while. Then other things happened. I found an old wristwatch of mine in a box in my closet full of life detritus. The watch's batteries had run out, and it was stopped at exactly 11 hours, 11 minutes and 11 seconds. I sat with a friend in Denny's at midnight and finally revealed this oddity of my life to him, which obviously only elicited smirks. He never left the table after I told him, and we were alone. I even made sure not to tell him in front of a waiter lest they too think I was nuts. At meal's end, he had to use the restroom, and I had already paid, so I went with him to the bathroom hallway and stopped dead in my tracks, grabbing his coat so he couldn't continue. I just pointed to the wall which had graffiti all over it, only 11/11, 11/11, 11/11 written in Sharpie everywhere. A few months ago I cleared boxes of junk out of an old office of mine before selling it. In one box was a wall alarm clock I had bought that surely had to be out of batteries by now, I thought, and then remembered the wristwatch. I thought to myself, if I pull this clock out, and it says 11/11, then nothing is real. I pulled it out, and the time was blinking. 11/11 to 11/11 to 11/11. I actually yelled, what the fuck? And with that, the alarm went off, startling me, and the time just went blank. The batteries were now dead, and it did not work at all anymore. So, what does it mean? Are we in the Matrix? Is this a dream within a dream? I have no fucking clue. Enough incidents have occurred just like this over 20 years, and with witnesses to convince me that I'm at least not insane. But what the fuck it could even mean is well beyond my ken. Anyway, you wanted to know, so there you are. A little backstory. I was a total idealist back in high school, so when choosing a college I chose to go somewhere that none of my friends were attending, so that I could strike out on my own in a finding myself sort of way. Well, I ended up making a few really close friends my first semester. I mean, these guys became like family to me in a matter of months. One day during winter break, one of those guys, my buddy Kimbo, had gone back home to visit friends and family, and on his return trip to our college he hit a bad patch of ice and got into a car accident and was killed. It hurt like a son of a beach for a long time, and I still think about him all the time. But anyways, a few weeks after Kimbo's accident, me and the rest of the guys were getting back from a party off campus, and as we were standing outside our dorm building smoking a cig, I felt my phone vibrating, and when I pulled it out I saw that I was getting a call from Kimbo's phone. Dumbfounded, I showed my friends the phone quickly and then answered. When I picked up, it just went directly to his voicemail, which played the same message it always had. It never happened again, and we never really talked about it, but for me, it was one of those someone's looking after me moments. I hadn't been doing very well after his death, but seeing his name show up on my cell phone screen one final time made me feel a whole lot better for a time and really helped me get out of the slump I was in. I have no idea how his phone cold possibly called me, and I doubt I ever will, but this was one glitch in the Matrix that I'll forever be thankful for. Rest in peace, Kim. But feel free to call again. Setting: acid trip when I was 25 or so, at this really cool music festival called Rustlers Valley, in the mountains in the east of South Africa. So, at the time I was taking a fair amount of acid, really enjoying what it did to my mind, but not really enjoying the actual trips at all. Mentally they were really hard work. I eventually figured out acid was not very good for me, personally, anyway. Early that night, going up, I was sitting somewhere, with someone, on the ground next to one of the stages. At some point I became aware of someone standing in front of me, looking at me. For some reason it gave me the most extreme chills, and I couldn't look directly at this person at all. I wanted to get up, leave, but somehow that just felt like a completely wrong thing to do. The person eventually walked away. After what felt like a really long time, the night went its course after that, and like any old acid trip, turned out to be several successive trips between Hell Valhalla. Much later, early morning hours, coming down, I walked around aimlessly and got to this spot next to one of the stages, where I spotted someone wearing the same jeans as I did, which was kind of unlikely, because I used to make my own jeans from very bright busy curtain fabric in those days. As I got closer, I realized it was me, from earlier that night. I stopped in front of myself, trying to figure out what to do with this bombshell, and then noticed how uncomfortable I was making earlier me, and ended up just wandering off, completely freaked out. After that trip, I still took mushrooms quite often. They always agreed with me, but that was my last acid trip ever. Oh boy, you guys would love where I work. Weird things happen here all the time, but I'll just talk about one of the creepiest moments I've experienced here. I work as a security / nighttime attendant at an apartment building. It's 24 stories, and one of the oldest buildings in the city. One night I'm sitting here when the phone rings at about 3 AM, and I answer. Hello, this is Drayden at the front desk. How can I help you? The voice on the other end sounded female, but was totally garbled, and the only bit I could make out was 23rd floor. I tried to tell the person I couldn't understand them, and asked what apartment they were in, but again garbled response and 23rd floor. After the third time of trying to understand them, and the same response, I said since I couldn't understand them I'd come up, and to meet me in the hallway. So I go to the main elevators, and both are up on the, surprise, 23rd floor. Luckily, we have an older service elevator and it's only on the 7th floor, so I call it down. I get it, and hit the button for the 23rd floor, but it won't move, and the inner door won't close, so I go to unlock the reset panel and boom, we start going up, door still open. I'm freaking out, and the elevator is shaking, because it goes pretty fast and is old. As I'm going up, I just stay towards the back and finally I reach floor 23. I step out, door closes just fine, and I look around the hallway. There's nobody around. I walk along slowly trying to listen for anyone awake who might have called, but there's nothing. So now I head the opposite direction and go towards where the regular elevators are, and when I get to them, they are just sitting there with their doors open. I was pretty freaked out, but I knew it could just be the elevators on the fritz, so I get in and figure I'll just reset them. When I get to floor 1, when I hear the sound of the back stairwell closing, So I quickly get out and go to the stairwell, and lo and behold, no one's there, but the maintenance door to the machine room is ajar, and at that time I'm the only one in the building with a key. At the top of the building is a large machine room housing all the really loud machinery that does stuff in the building and allows access to the roof. I don't like going into it because it's creepy as fuck and no one ever goes there, so at this point I'm seriously freaked out, but I muster up and head in. I shout hello, and there's no response. The lights in this room flicker because they are sheety fluorescent, so I can't see well either, but at the end of the room I can make out the roof access door and sure as shit, it's slightly open. So I slowly continue forward, checking the space in between each machine as I walk by, and there's no one there, so I open the roof access door. I can't see anyone ahead of me on the roof, but there is a slight wraparound, and if there was a jumper or something I needed to be sure, so I step out and leave the door ajar. Like it was almost immediately, the door is pulled shut. Now I might written it off as wind or something, but this door is hard to shut and hard to open. Really hard. I immediately grab the handle and hank it open, slam it behind me, and run straight for the maintenance door. It automatically locks when it's closed, so I slam it shut too, and go back to the 23rd floor hallway, get into an elevator, door still open, and go all the way down to the first floor. I go back to the main lobby, and as soon as I sit down, the phone rings. I pick it up, don't say a word, and sure as hell garbled voice again, only audibly saying 23rd floor. I hung up the phone, turned the ringer off, and spent the rest of the evening just staring at the parking garage security monitor. There's been a bunch of creepy things happen at this building. It's basically like the Overlook Hotel at night. I walked past a dark room here on the first floor once, and swore I saw myself standing inside it. The next night as I'm inside said room cleaning, the lights flip off, and I turn around to see a quick flash of myself walking past. TLDR, creepy ghost or some shit played games with me at work by trying to lure me onto the roof of the building. Posted this in a previous sub a while back, but I'll post it again as it fits here too. I had just turned 22 and my parents had sold their house and purchased a place out in the country. On the property there was a big shed not far from the house that I decided to turn into my place. Now I felt kind of uncomfortable in the shed sometimes, but my dog kept me company so it wasn't so bad. Anyway, I had been in there maybe 2 weeks, and one night I'm on the computer, my dog asleep at my feet, and I need to pee, so I get up and go outside to piss. It's a beautiful clear night and the stars were incredible. Next thing I hear the shed door slam behind me. I turn immediately and try to open it, but it won't budge. Now from inside the shed I can hear my dog start to growl, quietly at first then louder. Now he's barking, and I'm panicking trying to get the door open. I must mention that I'm 6'5" and well built, play sports etc. But even ramming my full weight into the door won't open it, and I'm really panicking now as my dog's barks turned into whines, then whimpering, then silence, and with all my might I slam into the door and it flies open. The light is off inside now, and it's pitch black. It won't turn back on, and I'm in complete darkness. Can't see my dog anywhere, and I stumble around trying to find a torch. Finally I find it, and pick it up, and turn on my torch, and I wasn't prepared for what I'd see next. My dog had literally squashed itself into the furthest darkest corner of the room, eyes closed, and is shaking violently. I immediately moved towards him, and as soon as I got within reach of him, he leapt at me into my arms and wouldn't move. I picked him up, and I swear I've never ran so fast in my goddamn life. I never stepped foot in that shed ever again, and my dog wouldn't even go near that part of the property. I don't know what happened in that shed that night, but I'll never forget it.